He did not remember the last arrow. He remembered music, bright and hard as glass. He remembered a boy trying to dance with a belly full of wine, a mother with a wolf's voice, the sound of a gut string snapping, and then the song of storm and iron as the hall grew teeth. He remembered the crown slipping as his head tipped sideways and a hand, not his own, pulling him down beneath a dying man. And the smell, gods, the smell, fat smoke, spilled ale, the copper stink of blood. The waters of the Green Fork took him then, and the river closed its cold mouth. He woke to wool scribbling his skin and the taste of peat in his mouth. He tried to move and the world came apart. When it mended, it showed a low roof of hides and woven reeds, lamp light like a dim coin, the white belly of a toad hunching in a wicker bowl. His side burned where a tongue of fire had been quenched. He lifted a hand and the hand was his, whiter than he remembered. A thread looped through the flesh near his ribs. He touched the thread once and a voice said, low and firm, "Leave it." The woman who spoke wore a cloak dyed so deep a brown it was near black, its hood thrown back to show a square face and hair bound tight. Her forearms were corded with tendon and dotted with knife scars, and a strip of bare fur ringed her left bracer. He knew her before the lamp's wick hissed and the shadow moved from her cheek. "Meej," he whispered, his mouth too dry for more. She gave him a bear's nod. "Aye, you're still breathing. That's a thing." He tried to lift his head and something pressed it down. A man's hand, heavy and calloused, smelling faintly of oil and iron. The man had a thick beard shot with gray and the look of a smith who had decided he would rather break the world than mend it. "You're a stubborn one," Galbart Glover said. "Do you aim to tear the stitches?" Meej tied them herself. "She'll take your ear if you undo her work." "I thought," Robb's voice broke. He swallowed dirt and smoke. "I thought we were all." "Not all," Glover said. His eyes went to the reed-woven door. "Not yet." He closed his eyes and found her face, too quick and too near. He could not let it stay. He tried to move and met the wall of his body. "My mother." Meej's mouth carved a slash. "The river took her. That's mercy of a sort." The thing inside him, which had been clenched since the crossbow sang, seemed to open then, and all the cold in the neck came pouring in. He met it, not with words, for he had none, but with his teeth. The hide roof creaked under an unseen hand of wind. Somewhere close the frogs started up their night calling again. Soft, insistent. The world persisted. It did not pause for grief. When he could hear properly again, he heard another voice in the corner, thin and light, like a reed fluted by water. "He needs broth." The speaker was small and narrow at the shoulders, his hair plaited with rush and his skin the green-brown of these waters. His eyes were quick as minnows. "He needs willow bark, and to be still as tree shadow." Glover grunted. "You're the one found him." The Cranigman shrugged. "Found is the word you Southron like." A smile quick as a fish's flick. "We only guided him the last of the way. He did the drowning himself." Meej flicked the Cranigman's ear with a finger gentler than her face. "Mind your mouth, Reedling," to Robb softer. "He is of Howland Reed's folk. Howland sends his word and his nets." "Howland," Robb said, and now the world steadied under his palm. A promise he had trusted, sent north with Meej and Glover when there was still snow only on the high ground. "He sent you to the twins?" "He sent eyes everywhere along the Green Fork," Meej said. "We were south with his kin when the word came that the stacks were smoking like wet hay. The Freys shut their gates, but a river doesn't keep a gate. We found you downstream with 3 corpses plugging your ears." She nodded to the Cranigman. "Drell there was quicker than a pike. Hooked you from the rushes before the fry dogs saw you." Drell dipped a ladle and brought him a bowl. It was not wine but something earth-sweet and thin, scalded and soothed in the same heartbeat. "I bit a fry," Drell said conversationally. He had goose fat on his fingers. "I don't like goose fat." His smile lived only in the eyes. "You are lucky, Wolf King. The river was near finished with you." The crown. The thought came and he saw it again. bronze and iron glancing lamplight off the tables, and then falling, less than a moment before the arrows found him. "My crown!" Meej's face did not move. "Lost to the water. Let it go." He lay very still with the bowl cupped to his chest and listened to the frogs sing the neck to sleep. He remembered his father's hand on his shoulder when winter wolves were howling beyond the walls, the weight of that hand and the way it had steadied everything. He would have given a year of his life to feel it again. He slept because his body dragged him under and because the frogs would not stop. The crannog shelter sat atop a tangle of black roots that rose from a pool like fingers of a drowned giant, and the path to it was a trick of stones and moss that shifted if you looked away. The light came gray and reluctant, the mist a rag across the still water. He woke to Drell's humming and the scratch of a blade on wood. Someone had put a fur under his shoulders. When he moved, his side ached, but the ache had corners now, like a thing built and not broken. He was empty as a bled deer and full of sorrow so clean it scraped. They kept him 3 days beneath the hides, and Drell told him the names of the frogs and which ones sang of rain. Glover brought him old news, riders seen north of Barrowton, the Ironborn still clawing at the stony shore, Manderley playing fat and foolish and not being either. And new news which was only rumor, and in the Riverlands rumor was as thick as midges. "Some say every wolf is dead," Glover said, mouth sour. "Some say a wolf with a crown of riverweed wandered into a sept at night and left muddy prints round the altar. Some say you are a white sent by Stannis to freeze the twins." "I bleed enough," Robb said. "I am no white." Drell touched the bandage and hissed as if the wound were his. Meej watched with eyes like splintered wood. There was a weight behind them, something she had decided while he slept. "You can die slow here, or you can stand and decide," she said. "Howland's folk will hide you a long while if you choose. The neck swallows more than it gives back. But the riverbanks are full of your dead, boy, their wives and their children and the hawkers at the bridge. It would be a cruelty to let their ghosts starve for a king." He did not need the lash. The 4 letters of his name knitted into a word he had woken to each morning since Winterfell, and inside that word was a promise he had not made only to himself. He asked for water and for his mail shirt. He tried to rise and learned how much a body remembers when it has been torn. He rose anyway. By the time he was ready to go, the crannog shelter had become a good place to leave. Drell wove him a cloak from rush and reed that smelled of cool rot and hid the shape of a lord's shoulders. Meej took up her axe as if it had never left her hand. Glover laced Robb's gorget tighter than was comfortable, gave him a look that asked and did not say. Robb nodded. "Howland Reed will not be seen by you," Drell said at the causeway. His bare feet made no sound on the damp stones. "But he sees. He sends word like wind." He touched Robb's wrist, light as a minnow's mouth. "When your path goes through water, tread softly. When it goes to stone, walk bold as storm. Don't forget the frogs. They always know. Tell your lord that the North remembers," Robb said. Drell's smile was not a thing of cheer. "We remember what the South tries to teach us to forget. They went south not by the King's Road, but by a braid of water paths that only the crannog men and those they showed could read. They wore no colors. They answered no horns. If men saw them in the mists, the men were later not sure, and when they followed, they found nothing but a bird rising out of a hemlock and a patch of ground that sank a little when stepped upon." Glover saved Robb from falling twice and did not remark upon it. Meej's silence was en or dipped into dark water. He would have ridden, but horses had no patience with the next ways and their smell was a shout. They took poles and flat-bottomed skiffs, and the water stained their boots black to the ankle. The frogs sang. When they came to earth, it felt untrue beneath the foot, too still after all that living, shifting mud. When at last the reeds gave way and the ground rose in a proper spine, it was to a hill no farmer would choose, stony and poor, crowned with the bones of a castle gnawed to its stumps. Robb knew the place by the way the wind moved. He had camped here once with his mother in the days when the river smelled mostly of silt and fish and not of men. Old Stones, where a queen had danced with her ghosts and a prince had set his harp. The hill kept its secrets. It would keep him for a night, Meej lifted the hide flap with the same reverence she gave the double-bit axe. Inside, the room was wind, lichen, and the long shadow of a man with hair like silver wire. The face beneath it was narrow and lined as a creek bed in drought. The eyes were river stones. "Uncle," Robb said, and the word was less and more than it had ever been. Brynden Tully crossed the distance in a stride, his hands going first to Robb's face as if to test whether the bone fit the flesh. He had never been a man for much touching. He touched now. "By the Seven's damnable mercy," he said. "They could not even do treachery clean." Robb's mouth worked. He found the words and did not wish to. "Mother." "I know," said the Blackfish, the sharps of his name in his mouth. "I asked the river for her, and the river closed its fist. We will speak of that when our throats can bear it." He turned to Meej then and Galbart and gave them each his nod, the kind of nod a man gives comrades who have kept his blood and name from worldly ruin. "You have my thanks." "The river's not ours," Meej said, and went to the door to stand with her back to it. Glover took a place there as well, crossing his arms. The Blackfish poured thin wine into an old cup and handed it to Robb. "You look like a man who was told he had one son and woke to three," he said dryly. "Be grateful for something unsought. The riverlands hum like a hive since the twins. Good men dead, worse men fat. The Freys are shouting how they broke a king and hunting boys with wolf banners to prove it. I've kept Riverrun's gates, but I won't keep them long unless the gods themselves take a hand." "Edmure?" Robb asked. "Held," Brynden said. "They gild him with blame to make their tables shine. He eats, he sleeps, he waits to be used for bait. They want Riverrun. If they get it, the river is a Lannister garden from Green Fork to Bay." Robb swallowed the wine like a man swallowing coals. "How many came away?" "Too few," the Blackfish said. His mouth made the smallest corner of humor. "We lost the men who talk loud at feasts. We kept some who know how to shut theirs at night and listen for a twig breaking. House Piper still has a bite. Blackwood stands if standing means eating bark. Jason Mallister holds Seaguard with his eyes and a dream of ships he doesn't have. The Bracken Lords would sell their mothers for a half-coin and a kiss from a Lannister cousin. There's a brotherhood in the hedges that wants to call you King of Thorns if you'll feed them long enough." Robb felt the place where the stitches tugged, the old wound and the older promise. "I sent Meej and Glover to the Neck to make ready the North." "And they did," Brynden said. "Whether the North can be made ready for a thing like this is another question. Roose Bolton has been named Warden in the Lannister way that makes a man's throat itch. The Manderleys are feeding fat men in green cloaks and playing a long game nobody's heard the rules to. The Ironborn have found new ways to smell like fish. The Umbers," he flicked his hand. "There are Umber men. Leave the rest." Robb let the names be stones in his mouth. He turned them until he had their weight. There was anger there. There was grief. There was a strange cold calm like the mists in the Neck that did not break for horns. The Freys think to hold a king like a trout on a line and wag him at their pleasure. "They think a good many things," Brynden said. "They keep a kennel of thought the way you keep hounds. Tywin Lannister is the man who feeds them. Then we take away his bowls," Robb said, and found his voice had steadied. The decision had been waiting, as Meej knew. He looked not at his uncle but at Meej Mormont, who had spoken to him of cruelty and kingship, at Galbart Glover, whose mouth bent toward laughter only when the laughter could cut. "We march south." The hide rustled with the night's breath. Bryndon's eyebrows twitched. "South," he repeated mildly, as if tasting a wine he had not ordered. "To the twins? To be pelted with duck bones on the causeway and netted like spring salmon." "Not to the twins," Robb said. He leaned forward and let the ache pin him to his purpose. "The twins are a door shut from the inside and guarded by a pig who thinks himself a bear. We don't need that door. There are a dozen ways to move south through these lands where nobody expects a king to go. We go to the small keeps that supply bigger ones. We go to the roads that carry bread into King's Landing. We speak where Tywin thinks no one is listening. We pull nails from his table until it collapses under its own meat. We take antlers if we can. We take Duskendale. We make the Blackwater itself taste like winter, while your uncle holds Riverrun against the inevitable, Brynden said, but the inevitable had given him a grin that was not friendly. You've learned since Winterfell. It's all I've done, Robb said. Learned how to be the wrong king at the wrong time. I would try being the right one now. They sat together until the wine was gone and the lamp had burned down, trading the names of fords and villages like counters in a game where every counter cost a man's life. When the plan took a shape that would not collapse at a touch, the Blackfish rose and stretched his back and made the little chuffing sound that was as near as he came to a laugh. There's a hedge knight with a yellow cloak in Lord Piper's hall, he said. He shoots better than he speaks. I'll send him. There's a priest with a red beard who drinks like a river and brings men back from the grave when he isn't looking. He troubles me, but he knows the hedges. We'll use him or we'll step around him. There's songs about old stones. Perhaps the singers will do something for once besides ruin good air. If the singers come, make them bring knives, Robb said. He dreamed that night of a hall without music. Not the twins' Winterfell. It had no roof now in his dream, vast as the sky, and the snow fell into it and melted when it touched the flagstones. His father stood by the heart tree with his face half in shadow. Robb went to him to lay his grief at his feet, but he had no mouth in the dream, so he pressed his forehead to the old ironwood, and the bark was cold on his skin, and he smelled the sap and the snow and the wolf's hair caught in an old crack. When he woke, the dawn was as pale as an unbaked loaf. They left Old Stones in the thin rain. The plan ran before them like a fox with a good lead. Brynden Tully did not come. Riverrun needed him more than Robb did, and that was a bitter thing and a true one. He kissed Robb once on the cheek, quick as a sword hilt, and turned away to gather his handfuls of Piper and Blackwood riders and the old men who could still pull a bowstring. Meege took her place at Robb's right. Glover took the left. Behind them came 24 riders in drab cloaks and 3 times that number on foot, carrying spears that had been hunting tools the day before. They moved quick and mean. The first keep they went to had a name like a cough and belonged to a landed knight too fearful to be treacherous. Robb's men climbed the wall in a gray dawn and were sitting by the well when the porter came out to piss. They took the keep by speaking softly and letting the spears show their points like teeth. They broke the larders and left a docket for every sack taken. A line scratched on a board, a mark that said the king had come and the king had paid as kings in the river paid when there was river law. They sent a boy with a sharp face and a sharper eye to carry the board to the nearest September. It would not be believed, but it would be sung. In these lands, song traveled quicker than horse. At night, the men gathered under hedges and in the corners of empty barns. When the wind came off the marshes, it smelled of salt and something older than salt. They boiled nettles with oats and made a stew the Crannogmen said turned a man's feet to roots and his fingers to fish. The first time they robbed a train bound south. Barrels of barley, salt fish, a wagon laden with nails. Robb could do no more than lean on the backboard and breathe while the men ran, heads down and hands full. The second time, he was there in the hedge at dawn, counting the axles by the groan of their grease, and when the rearmost wagon slumped into a hole that had not been there last night, he was already moving. His side ached in time with his heart, and he smiled like a man holding a coin under his tongue. Word came and came. The twins had thrown a feast for their new dogs. A fry cousin had been found in a pond with his throat open and his breeches down, his purse full of river stones. Gregor Clegane had burned a mill and 3 houses near Fairmarket. Riverrun's chemistry of hope and hunger had become more hunger than hope. Arya Stark, his Arya, had been seen on the road with a man who wore his helm for a face, or a woman who wore a face for a helm. In King's Landing they were stitching banners with Marjorie Tyrell's roses and shilling them in gold. South and south again, the Blackwater bent its elbow like a man about to drink. They'll send someone with a hard hand, Meege said one afternoon as their horses stood knee-deep in a ford and the dead water shifted around their legs. Tywin doesn't spare men to soft work at a time like this. Tarly, if he can be coaxed from his turnips. Adam Marbrand. Ser Fosobai. Men who clean their knives. Let them come, Robb said. He hid his gall with his teeth. We will make them ride where the ground doesn't like them. At the edge of the pine woods nearest Duskendale, they found the Brotherhood without banners perched like magpies in the low boughs. They came down laughing, rough men with soft boots, a red priest smelling faintly of smoke and sour wine, a singer whose beard was a lie, and a boy whose bow looked like a stick until the strings sang. Lord Beric Dondarrion had one eye and a gentler voice than Robb remembered. His smile went to his ruined mouth and made of it something nearly whole. "Your Grace," he said, and his one eye measured, and the men behind him rasped their boots on at the old formality. "We heard a king drowned in the river. Rumor is the only thing they have no tax on," Robb said. He took Beric's hand and felt the heat in it, as if the priest's god had made a home there. "We need the roads out of Rosby and the freight yards at Duskendale. We need 10 men to climb a wall no one watches. We need a dozen carts left where they won't be found and half a dozen put somewhere they will." Beric said, "We need food, and justice, and a summer to last until we can find them." He had a way of saying grim things with a grace that did not dull them. "Thuras here thinks you will bring either justice or a sword we can sharpen upon." The priest grunted. He had wine on his breath, but his eyes were very clear. "Your lady mother was kind to me when I was a boy," Thuras said, without preface and without ceremony, bowing his red head so that the light caught for a moment on the copper of his breastplate. "She fed me meat on a fast day and laughed when I told her I'd burn for it. The river brought her to me colder than any winter. I have not yet found a prayer I trust enough to use on her." He looked up through smoke-colored lashes. "I tell you this so there will be no lies between us when we light the fields." Robb's hands found the reins and gripped them until the leather creaked. "If the gods wanted her back," he said, each word a stone laid on water, "they would not choose me to make the bargain. Leave her to the river. Help me take antlers." Thuras nodded without a word. Beric ran his thumb along the edge of his sword as if it spoke the knight's plan to him in a language only he and the dead understood. In the pines, the wind was full of the smell of sap and the faint breath of distant rain. They took antlers 3 days later, in a fog that moved like a thinking thing. House Buckwell's men had grown used to waking to mist on the Blackwater and had not yet learned to count the heads in it. The wall was old and had settled into the ground too many years. In one place it made a corner with a lean-to shed where the mortar had crumbled and been patched with slabs of moss. Robb put his hand on that moss and felt the wall breathe. They went up in the last hour before dawn, boots on stone, stone on fog, and the first man who saw them thought he was dreaming and laughed and lifted his spear too late. It was a fast thing, done quiet. When horns finally blew, they were the wrong horns. The castle's gates were shut from outside and its drawbridge chain wedged with an iron bar that had not been there at sunset. 3 Buckwell men tried to fight in the yard and died on the wet stones with their hair stuck to their cheeks. Robb stood one moment under the portcullis while men ran, and the fog from his breath made a crown on the iron bars and blew away. He found the lordling who wasn't a lord at all, a boy in a bed with hair on his lip and sleep in his eyes, and said, "You will surrender this castle so that your small folk aren't trampled when the next army comes. You will eat your stores with them and not before them. You will put out word to the sept that the king in the rivers pays for what he takes, and you will write it with your own hand and beat it with your own seal. If you lie to me, you will not live long enough to learn another mistake." The boy gaped. He wrote. The steward shook when he watched the seal press into wax. The fog burned off sudden and the sun broke in 3 lines through the pines, and for a bare heartbeat the yard was a holy thing. From Antlers they went to Duskendale and did not attempt the walls. You do not take Duskendale with a handspan of men and a wolf's name. You take its roads and its wharves and the men who lift its bales. They burned nothing they could use, and they used more than the town knew it had. The goddess of Duskendale was iron and timing. The first night, Thuras set a fire in a wagon of brooms stacked too near the stables, and the wind did the rest while Robb's men pulled down a side gate and let the stable boys run. The shouts meant there were fewer eyes at the south tower where Beric's men went up. They were inside before the roosters thought about the day. When the second morning came, the river had 24 new boats, all of them stolen or forgotten by men who had more fear than cleverness, and those boats carried barrels that once had been wine and now were wheat. Duskendale's own guards helped carry those barrels. Not because they had turned their cloaks, but because a boy named Teb with quiet hands and a smile like a slice of apple had told them a truth about their wives' bellies. It was hunger that did as much as courage. Robb stood on the quayside and watched the boats slide past like slow fish. He had not realized he had been cold until his blood warmed. A raven found them at Antlers the day after. A cruel, glossy thing with a letter tied to its leg and a melodious croak that sounded almost like laughter. The hand it came from was a small hand, too careful for authority. The words it carried were Tywin's. He read in the dim of the old Lord's solar with Meege and Glover and Beric and Thuras standing around as if the room itself had been summoned to witness the thing. Tywin had never wasted words on adornment. He had not begun now. He was precise as a blade. He did not call Robb king. He did not name him at all. He invited him to bring his remaining men to the twins to swear an oath and be pardoned. He promised he would not hang him if he came naked and on foot. "His bait stinks," Meege said with contempt. "He thinks you too hungry to smell it." "He thinks I cannot read," Robb said. He folded the letter once, twice. He did not burn it. He slid it under a candlestick as if it were nothing more than an old tally with a borrowed knife to balance it. "Let him send his men. We are not going to him. He will come to us. He will send Marbrand or Tarly to sweep the roads, and they will trip on what we have laid for them." They moved again, not seeking battle, refusing it when it would do nothing but break bones. Their fights were foxfights, short, bloody, under hedges. Tarly's vanguard came up through Rosby with mouths set for meat and found nettles and hammers. They left 2 horse traders and 1 banner in the ditch. Marbrand's men reached the hollow where the road ran between stands of oak and found a place where the wind had taught the trees to lean together and drop their leaves heavy as blankets. 6 cartloads of leaves and a night's snow of oak rained down when ropes were cut, and horses that had been good soldiers all their lives remembered they were prey. Men fell. Men were pulled feet first into bracken by crannogmen whose knives looked like broken shells. The oaks held their tongues. From the south came news that bent the world. A golden wedding in King's Landing. A feast of peacocks and carp in Aspic, of fine songs and finer wine. A child king with more cruelty than sense, and a queen who had learned to smile while her jaw was clenched. Pie with doves afloat. Then a cough, a color of face not meant for the living. A hand clutching a throat that did not intend to be grasped. A king's death like a small, neat murder performed within a pageant loud enough to drown all blame. Robb read the crannock-scratched note by torchlight and felt the ground swing under his feet like a boat untied. He did not dance. He remembered his father's voice, saying that men who rejoiced at a boy's death did not deserve a son. He did not mourn either. The boy had been a sword with no hand upon it. But he sat a while in the old solar where the Buckwells had kept their debtors' tallies and let the light from the torch make a candle of his thumb. Tywin was not a man to be left idle by grief. He would tighten his hands. He would not ride. He would send. The city would eat itself until a new mouth decided how it should be fed. "It makes them clumsy," the Blackfish said when the word reached Riverrun. The message came back with his hand upon it. A swift water rag of ink and meaning. "Use the day before they think again." Robb did. Duskendale became a sponge that squeezed grain north, not south. Antlers bristled not with spears, but with a dozen ways to slow horses. He set men to digging a cut from a shallow creek into a low meadow near the road to Rosby, so that the next rain would make a new swamp where the map said there wasn't one. You could make a battlefield as surely as you could find one if you knew how to speak the land's language and were willing to listen. The crannogmen taught them. The first stand-up fight they could not avoid came on a pale morning near a village called Crone's Teeth, where a ridge ran like a dull blade between 2 patches of coppiced wood. The Lannister force was heavier by half again. Their armor shone and their horses were fat. They came at speed, sure as men who had been told their enemies would run, and met the first of the river tricks. A line of stakes buried slantwise with their points up, too low to see when a man was sitting a horse and thinking of glory. The front rank struck, floundered, stumbled. The men behind pushed, and for a moment the whole lovely, vicious machine of war bucked and trembled. That was the moment Robb had been waiting for, his ribs singing and his mind cold. He sent in the pikes with their steps beaten into the ragged ground, and the bare women of House Mormont howling like they had found a thing that had insulted their grandmother. The fight was nasty, as all good work is nasty. It lasted less than half an hour. When it was over, men stood and looked about as if they had woken in a yard that was not their own. Then they seemed to remember whose names they were meant to carry, and those who could run ran. After, Robb walked the field with Meege and Glover, the way his father had taught him. Because a lord does not ask his men to do a thing he will not stand and look upon when it is done. He stepped around a boy no older than Bran had been, and his heels skidded on a patch of turf slick with some stranger's life. The morning was very quiet. He felt the silence settle into him and become a thing he might call upon later when the shouting began again. "Every man I put into the ground," he said, not looking at either of them, "is a promise I have to keep to the ones still breathing." Meege grunted. "Then keep marching." News went through the hedges faster than any horn. The small folk learned that the king in the rivers paid for bread and punished men who burned the farmer's slat fence for a jest. A miller's daughter who had lost 3 fingers to a fry trap came to show Robb the trapper's path. An old woman with hair like unspun wool told them the exact breadth of a ford by the way the silt lay on stones. A septon in a patched robe offered to hide their marks in his book, where the gods would see the justice and perhaps not be angry later. Men who disliked their lord's new alliances took their bows and stood in hedgerows with eyes like cats. Not all of it was helpful. Some men simply wanted a coin for telling a king a story and a name to call to their sons if the wind turned. That was a thing kings bought as well when they were wise. When the Lannisters finally sent something with a name to it, it came under a blue sky so honest it looked like a lie. Randyll Tarly rode at the head of 600, his surcoat clean as a sep's steps, his men arrayed in rows you could have used as a garden trellis. He did not chase shadows or send outriders on fool's errands. He sent them where the ground might lie and where the map said they should. He hid a hidden camp in the hedges and found nothing but a pot of oat seed burning itself to ash. He turned south, and the men of the rivers turned east, and by the time he reached the place where the road forked, there were 3 forks where the map had promised one. They played that game for a day and a night and a day. Then they fought, because sometimes there is no way not to fight. The place was a shallow bowl in the ground, the grass cropped by sheep that had belonged to someone whose name the war had erased. Robb stood at the lip of the bowl and watched the dust of the Lannister men make a second sky. He thought of a boy with a crown in his hands and of his father's face in a dream and of a river closing its cold mouth. He gave orders one at a time so that no one had to carry too many in their heads. He watched Thuras light 3 sheaves of dry grass with a prayer he delivered as if he were arguing with the god under his breath. He watched Beric ride where the line wanted to bend and make it a straight thing with the edge of his sword. He watched Meege carve a path through a knot of billmen with her axe and a sound in her throat like satisfaction. When it ended because the Lannisters had come for a boar and found a wasp hive. They pulled back clean, with men alive who could still carry their lord's name on their shields. Tarly rode to the top of the bowl and looked down, and his face did not say defeat. It said arithmetic. He was a man who would learn his sums and return when the numbers pleased him better. He saluted, as a proper enemy does, and rode off toward King's Landing with his banners held level and his jaw held leveler. That night, Robb lay in a lean-to built of 4 poles and a tarp and listened to the wind fret at the grass. He could have slept. He did not. He took up a scrap of parchment and wrote by the light of a tallow dip until the words came right. He wrote to his uncle, with thanks and the count of dead and the placement of grain. He wrote to Jason Mallister to ask for carpenters who could build a bridge you could take down quicker than you put it up. He wrote a letter to his sister he could not send because he did not know where in the world Arya ran, and he wrote it anyway because sometimes you must put the shape of a loved one's face into the air the way a mason sets a capstone. Not because the air needs it, but because men do. He wrote to Jon and didn't call him brother because Jon was not allowed brothers where he had sworn himself. And then he crossed out Jon's name because even writing it felt like treason to the vows his brother had taken. He wrote to no one and folded that last letter small as the nail on his smallest finger and kept it under his tongue until the fat of the tallow dip burned his eyes and the ink became a shadow of itself. In the dark before dawn, a wolf howled from somewhere distant in the pines. It was not gray wind. The sound made the hairs on his forearms rise. He let it pass through him and leave him colder and steadier. Dawn found them moving again. The roads wore scars now where carts heavier than they should have been had gone in the night. The hedges had ears. The far fields had eyes. When the day warmed enough to make men consider taking off their leather jacks, they reached a ridge that showed, low and far and improbable as a song whispered by a child, the faint glimmer of rooftops. Beyond, unlovely in its beauty, lay the dull gleam of a river that had become a border between 1,000 hungers. When he climbed the last 2 yards of the ridge, the sun drew a line on the world, and the sprawl of King's Landing showed itself on the southern horizon like a scab on the lip of the Blackwater. It looked smaller than the stories said, like a thing that could be taken in a mouth and chewed. That was a lie the distance told. It was a city built of fear and debt and stone. It had more teeth than any wild dog, and it had a Lannister in its throat giving it orders. "You won't take that with hedge knives and a good heart," Meej said, not unkindly. "I won't take it at all," Robb said. He had learned the shape of what he wanted. "I'll make it spend. I'll make it sweat. I'll make it feed me while it starves. I'll knock on its door every morning and every night until the men who sleep there forget how to close their eyes." Glover shaded his face with his hand. "They'll send every man who can sit a horse and his dead aunt besides, if they think you mean to set a foot on that bridge." "Good," Robb said. He looked long at the black mouth of the mud gate, at the way the light clung to the crenels on the city's crown. He imagined Tywin's neat mind taking his measure across the distance between them. "Let them empty their henhouses. We will be there in the morning and away at noon. We'll eat their road. We'll drink their river. We'll teach them that a king they tried to drown knows how long a man can hold his breath." He took his horse's reins and led the beast down the far side of the ridge, into the half-forest that had known men in armor and men with nothing but bark on their feet. The trees closed over them like a promise. The frogs were very far away here, but sometimes he imagined he could still hear them, counting the nights in the neck with the patience of water. He put his palm to the first tree he passed and felt the roughness of its bark. He imagined, a moment, that he could feel a pulse there. He walked until he did not need to imagine it. That day they set their snares closer to the city than any lord with a title had dared in 20 years. That day he sent 3 boys into the town to eat an onion near a gate and listen to what men who wore gold cloaks said when they drank. That day he spoke to Thuras of Myr at the edge of the wood where the light broke into ladders on the ground. "If there is a god who is not a liar," he said, quiet because the air felt like glass, "I will promise him anything for 1 hour where men hear me when I say what this war has to be. Just 1 hour before someone calls me Oathbreaker or Boy or Stark and forgets what I have put in my hands to keep them alive." Thuras blew out a breath that moved his beard. "If there is a god who is not a liar," he said, "he doesn't trade, but he is not deaf." He looked at Robb as if looking at a man who had become a thing in a story and would not know it until after the end. "Make your hour. In the Kingswood at dusk, when the last light makes everything either honest or very fine at pretending to be." Robb laid his sword on his lap and listened to the men breathe. He could pick out Meej by the way her breath stopped when she sharpened the axe. He could pick out Glover by the old song his nose made when he slept sitting up. He could hear Barrack's murmured talk with Thuras that was more prayer than argument and more argument than prayer. He felt something loosen in him that had been tightened since a day in Winterfell when a crow had brought a letter and everything had begun to walk away. He closed his eyes and saw the river again. He saw a woman's hair spread like weed on the surface, saw fingers beneath the water almost touching and not touching. He saw a wolf's head raised in a cage and the light on its teeth before the spears found its heart. He saw his father's hand on his shoulder and he saw the hand leave. He saw his own hand closing on a thing made not of bronze and iron but of choice. When he opened his eyes, the first star was pricking the sky, and the world seemed to be waiting for him to say a word he did not know the shape of. He said nothing, He rose when the dark had finished arriving and walked the circle of men and dogs and embers, and where he found a man awake with his fear, he gave him a drink, and where he found a man sleeping with his mouth open, he closed it gently as a father would for a child. The hour he had asked for may come or not. He would not spend the night bargaining. He would spend it walking. At dawn, they went down toward the river again, not to cross it but to remind it of their names. The mist lay over the black water like a woolen cloak. The first gulls, dirty and impertinent, rode its hem. From the walls of the city came the faint cry of a man boasting to his fellow guard of a woman whose name he had not earned the right to speak. The world smelled of damp iron and of smoke from 1,000 breakfasts. Robb breathed, and the breath went into him and came out again, not turned to steam in some other man's game. The march south had been a path through water and reed and hunger. It had not ended. It had only learned to speak the tongue of the land it walked. He set his hand on his horse's neck, and the horse's skin twitched, alive. By noon the sun had burned the mist to a ripple at the edges of men's cloaks. By noon 3 carts had rolled off a road they had no business being on and been discovered by soldiers with complaints about the weight of salt. By noon, on a hill just beyond where a common man could throw a stone into the river and perhaps shame himself for trying, a king who had been drowned and did not know how to be otherwise stood and felt the world's pulse in the ground and waited for the day's work to begin.